Museums Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we work, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and First Peoples language groups and communities across Victoria and Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. Our organisation, in partnership with the First Peoples of Victoria, is working to place First Peoples living cultures and histories at the core of our practice.
Good evening and welcome to Melbourne Museum, everybody. Lovely to see you. My name's Narin Vis and I'm the Director of Museums Victoria Research Institute. I welcome you here in person, and I know there are many of you who are online. Good evening to you. I also would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands Museums Victoria operates from. That is the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nations. I very much would like to pay my respects to the knowledge and the tradition and the wisdom of elders past, knowing that working at Museums Victoria, we are very privileged to be working with the current elders, and it's always wonderful to be seeing the emerging leaders as well, acknowledging that. So, National Science Week. We're having a great time with it. It's Australia's annual celebration of science and technology. It runs each year. And do you know that it features more than 1,000 events around Australia? We love this special focus on science, but at Museums Victoria we like to say that it's Science Week every week of the year. We have ongoing programs of research, we house our research collections, and we also run science education and engagement here at Melbourne Museum, and of course at Science Works. So tonight we are really going to go into some of the facts, the myths, the fictions, analyse it, go deep into the two amazing dinosaurs that we have under this roof at this moment. Today at Melbourne Museum we have Victoria the T.Rex and also Horridus the Triceratops. This is a very rare occasion and has never happened before in Australia. So delving into the world of these once existing animals, we have two fantastic scientists, may I say, and it gives me, of course, great pleasure. We have Dr. Matthew Corano, all the way from the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History from Washington, D.C. in the US, and our very own Museums Victoria, Dr. Erich Fitzgerald, Senior Curator of Vertebrate, getting tongue-tied, Palaeontology. So now we'll have an interesting format for tonight's events, and I will hand it over to Kate Phillips, our Senior Curator for Science Exhibitions, who's going to be hosting the discussion. Please enjoy.
Thank you, Narin, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you all here tonight. Have we got any people who call themselves nature nuts in the audience? Any nature nuts? I'm definitely a nature nut. Dinosaur nuts? Good. That's what I expected at a talk like that. Thank you. So, to start us off, I really wanted to find out a bit about our two resident dinosaur nuts. First, a visiting paleontologist, Dr. Matthew Currano. Matthew's out here as a Fulbright scholar, and I wanted to find out what brought you to Melbourne.
Well, I was visiting Melbourne in 2019. Australia hosted a global paleontology conference, and I came and visited the collection. of dinosaur fossils here, which are unique fossils. They are animals that only lived here in Australia. And it really occurred to me that there were a lot of interesting questions to be answered about these animals. And I sort of hatched a plan to come back for a longer visit, which I was able to make come true this year. So I've been here for 4 months, and I think I've seen all of them, which is nice. And it's really an interesting environment that was a polar ecosystem full of dinosaurs, but it wasn't terribly cold. We don't have these environments today, so understanding them requires studying these fossil collections.
So that was different to what you could find in the States?
You can go to Alaska, and we also have Arctic dinosaur communities in Alaska. They're from a different time period, so these dinosaurs are about 120 million years old. The ones in Alaska are about 70 million years old, which all sounds sort of, it's a long time ago, but that's almost as much time as between us and Tyrannosaurus. So these are different dinosaurs, different communities, and we only really have 3 or 4 places in the world where they're preserved at all. So studying them all is actually quite useful.
Great. Now, if you, as you're sitting listening, if you have a question that you would like to ask either of our speakers tonight, you can do that using your phone and using Slido. So at any stage, you can add your question to that list. There is the QR code that you need, or you can go to slido.com and enter the code hashtag Victoria 1408, and then you can pop your question in there. So going over to Dr. Erich Fitzgerald, what was it that first got you interested in being a paleontologist?
Well, Kate, thanks very much. I think the thing that really got me interested in the idea of paleontology and the idea that you could just maybe pursue a career in it was simply asking myself, and I guess asking nature, asking the cosmos, where does that come from? I remember looking. I actually remember looking at a pet cat. In fact, at one time there were 5 cats in the household. Looking at the cat and just saying, where did the cat come from? I mean, what did cats evolve from? What did the earliest cats look like? And there was lots of information out there in all the books I had at home, at the library, local library, school library, etc., museums, about dinosaurs. We all love them. But where was the information on early cats? I don't study cats now, or fossil cats, and I don't have any cats as pets for that matter. However, I just have this distinct memory of wondering about the beginnings of cats. And I think that's getting to the beginnings of things, whether it's animals, plants, ourselves. That's what really drove my interest. And of course, that led inevitably to fossils, the best evidence we have, I'm biased, but the best evidence we have of the beginnings of life.
So there was that early curiosity looking at the world. So anyone who's got cats, go home and have a look at them with fresh eyes. Wonder where they came from. Where did the cat come from?
Weird animals.
Weird animals. But so that's the curiosity and the interest in the natural world. How about you, Matt? Where did your journey to becoming what I think must be the coolest job title, which is curator? Is it? No. What is it? Curator of Dinosauria. I think that is
a good business card to have.
That is the coolest job title, Curator of Dinosauria. But what was your journey before you became the Curator of Dinosauria?
So I actually have a memory in 2nd grade of seeing a dinosaur book for the first time over my friend's shoulder in the 2nd grade classroom. And it was this very mesmerizing book, beautiful pictures of dinosaurs, and this would have been in about 1976. So for those of you who are younger than about 30, I will never be able to explain just how scarce dinosaur things were at that point in time. There was no Jurassic Park, and dinosaurs were only for children, so there was no, out there in the world, there were no dinosaur things. So this book, I was lucky to happen across this book, and I remember just every time I could take it out of the school library, I would take it home, and I was lucky enough to grow up near a museum that also had dinosaur fossils, and so between the library and the museum, I was able to continue this sort of interest, and I mean, they were sort of mesmerizing to me and allowed a certain amount of imagination about, you know, what they were like, what kind of noise did they make. You know, I would draw all these pictures, but, you know, in the back of your mind, you knew they were real, so it didn't quite feel like just fantasy. And so there was something about that mixture, I think, that always really appealed to me.
So something about that had triggered your imagination, but it also had that thing about it being real, and as in the same way as seeing a cat in front of your eyes and wondering where it came from.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely the case. And, you know, something that, you know, Matt and I, we were talking earlier on today about the fact that paleontology's maybe not unique, but really, I guess, it's interesting amongst all the other fields of science in that in paleontology, a disproportionate number, you know, we're examples of this, but also a disproportionate number of paleontologists actually get inspired by not so much the scientific details initially, but it's often the representation of the science, the artwork, what we call paleo art, and the reconstruction, the recreation of these lost worlds, extinct animals and plants. And I think that that's something that really runs through a lot of paleontology and paleontologists. I mean, do you think that, do you find that in the States, a lot of your colleagues?
I think that's true. I think it's sort of broadly true of biology that there's kind of an overlap with like visual art. You get a lot of people who like to draw in general, and I think there's a kind of common ground in there. And then, of course, with paleo, it just gets really kind of very influential in a different way. But versus, you know, people I know who are, you know, like engineering, for example, they often tend toward the music side of things, like the math and music side. So there's a lot of kind of the visual appeal, I think, plays a huge part. And I remember as a kid, I would just, any image I could find, right, it was just like gold. And there just weren't that many. I mean, you sort of live in an oversaturated environment now, which I think is the benefit of, you know, you have some extremely good paleo art today. And in the past, it was good, but it was more art. And a lot of times we didn't know that much. I mean, you know, we had to create art for this exhibit at the Smithsonian, and you can just make out behind the T.Rex, there's a sort of a mural there, and you can at least tell there's trees. This is how I would have thought of that painting, but our director is a paleobotanist, so every tree has leaves that are based on fossil leaves in that painting. So we have an artist who like would actually go and bother to do that, and you can do that now, which I think when I was a child, you know, they were like Bob Ross trees, who just sort of like, you know, take your brush, smush, smush, smush. And so, I mean, the age of paleo art now is like orders of magnitude different.
That really speaks to one of our questions from Taryn. Says, how much of dinosaur ecology is educated guesses versus based on hard evidence from the fossils?
Well, Matt, I'm happy for you to disagree with me on this. I'd say it's an interesting, healthy mix of both. But I think it's fascinating how much we actually do have a relatively good handle on. But Matt, you know, again, I think there's, as you put it, there's an aspect to all of this where we might observe something about a dinosaur and observe something about a fossil or a group of fossils that have been found and say, well, you know, this is telling us this, but then we may not have a greater understanding of what it might mean in actual fact in the living organism. And what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's, I assume it's true for fossil whales as well, right? Which is
we know everything about fossil
your
whales.
organism that you love the most.
Yeah.
You might know it's a baleen whale, but you're not going to know exactly what went into its mouth, right? And as a fossil animal. And in dinosaurs, you often will look at, like, you know, say teeth or the jaw or something, and you might be able to kind of broadly categorize the animal as a herbivore or carnivore, or, maybe a mixture. Usually we say it's an omnivore if it doesn't have any teeth, so it's like a total punt. But you could look at the wear on the teeth. You might say, well, this is a diet of more abrasive food or less abrasive food. But to say the animal ate something specific, you would want to find like the gut contents or the abdominal contents or fossil feces that you knew where they came from.
So
and
I was about to say,
very rare to have any of those.
Can you link the coprolites, the fossilized feces? Can you link them though? Are there known examples?
Almost
you can link
never.
it to
Almost
a
never.
dinosaur?
So there's a fossil, a coprolite, fossil feces, that is supposed to have come from a T.Rex, and there are circumstantial pieces of evidence. It's full of chopped up bone, which is a pretty good first thing. And the second thing is it's enormous. And the only other land animal in this environment that would be of a similar size would be a T.Rex. And I would say, oh, that's a reasonable inference that that's a T.Rex coprolite. There are handful, like fewer than 20 dinosaurs I know that have stomach contents that we all agree are stomach contents and not stuff that washed in later, out of tens of thousands of dinosaur fossils. And most coprolites you don't know. You can say it's carnivore or something. And most of the time it's carnivore because herbivore coprolites don't preserve very well. Carnivore coprolites have bone in them, and so that bone is what helps the coprolite fossilize. And herbivorous, it's like, think about cow droppings. It's goop, and so it's not really, there's not much to it. It doesn't really survive. So we have very little of that. It's a bummer.
Now, one of the things that you have commented on when we're talking about these two amazing dinosaurs is that T-Rex is really probably the most studied dinosaur ever.
Right, or the lab rat for paleontology. If you have like, oh, let's see if can we CAT scan a bone? We'll go get a T-Rex bone and try it out on that first.
Lab rats are going a little bit too far.
Okay. But it's we sort of try everything on T-Rex, right? So you know things about T-Rex, but you don't always know even what to do with that information sometimes. And then we never try it on another thing, and then so what does that help? So it's great in one sense, and then on the other sense, we should probably be looking more at other dinosaurs.
If I can ask a question for you then, and I've been meaning to ask you this, so now you're about to go back to the States, so I'm going to ask you now. What to you then is the most interesting or potentially interesting, let's say, unknown about Tyrannosaurus Rex? I mean, you just said it's a model. Yes, okay, there's claims, there's alleged proteins, let's say.
Right.
Yeah, that have been recovered from some Tyrannosaurus Rex bones. Estimates of body mass, so size, all
Growth
kinds of
rates,
biomechanics. Yep.
Females versus males.
We know more
force.
about it than most lizards that are alive today on the Australian continent.
Correct.
Right? So, what then? What's next?
You're asking
What
me to
hasn't been
encourage
done?
people to spend more time studying T-Rex, right?
Yeah, but
Which
we
I
might
don't
have
wanna do.
fans. We might have fans.
The biggest live argument right now is whether things that we have, fossils from the same environment as T-Rex, represent young T-Rexes or grown-up small Tyrannosaurs. And there's a variety of reasons why that has equivalents. Nanotyrannus, or there's other names. There are many names that have been applied to these, many species names, because everybody wants their own Tyrannosaur. But Nanotyrannus would be the most prominent one. Nanotyrannus is only a head, and that's like the one part of the body that's very hard to age the individual. So we can tell how old a dinosaur is, usually with limbs or ribs. You can cut into them, and they have growth rings like a tree. And so you can count those rings and get an estimate of their age, but you can't really cut the skull bones apart. They don't grow the same way. And so we only have the head of a Nanotyrannus, so we don't know how old that Nanotyrannus is. And then we have other things that people have been arguing now for probably 15 years. That's the biggest live argument, I would say. And it has some ramifications because either there's a sort of smallish predator running around along with T-Rex, or there isn't, and basically T-Rex as a teenager has a different job than T-Rex as an adult, which is ecologically kind of interesting. And in other dinosaur environments isn't how it works. Usually there is a small thing running around.
So it's not strictly analogous to the situation, say, in the savannah of tropical Africa, where you'll have lions, hunting dogs, cheetahs, leopards, hyenas. It may have just been T-Rex all the time, every time, everywhere.
Well, so you'd have something that would be like a lion and something that would be like a jackal.
But they were all
and then nothing in
Tyrannosaurus.
between. No, well, so then you have things like raptors and stuff, which were person-sized.
Yep.
But then nothing in between that and something that weighs 7 tons.
Yep.
Which would be odd. On the other hand, there are a lot of teenage T-Rexes around, so they have to eat something, and it's reasonable either way. But interesting to know which it is. In other dinosaur environments, you can go like the late Jurassic in North America, and there's 5 things that look like lions. And so they're figuring how they figured that out. I don't know, but they're clearly all living in the same place at the same time. So this kind of ecology changes in time and space in dinosaur communities in ways we don't always understand.
I have another question here about the T-Rex behaviour. Were T-Rex nomadic throughout the year or seasons, or were they very territorial like modern-day saltwater crocodiles? Is that something we know anything about? I guess it's a bit hard to find evidence on that one.
I want to say that despite the fact that he works on fossil whales, Erich's the only person on the stage who's written a book about a dinosaur.
We have a phrase here called being thrown under the dinosaur. I like working on big animals, okay? Whales, dinosaurs, all right. You work with fossils this big, your eyes, it's a problem. Anyway,
We can move on to the next question if you like.
It's a good.
No, I like that question. I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure. I haven't read all the literature on this topic, but I'm not sure if we have any idea, even a steer or a guide in one direction towards one hypothesis or another as being falsified or not.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think this is it's a level of information that we don't normally have access to in the fossil record, and so I think we haven't thought about very much. But it's an interesting question for sure.
And it leads very nicely into this what piece of undiscovered knowledge, this is April asks, what piece of undiscovered knowledge about the T-Rex or the Triceratops would you most like to know? Is there something that's just been piquing your interest, but we don't know?
Yes. In the case of Triceratops, can I give 2 here? Am I allowed 2?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, rapid succession though, we're on the clock. Okay, first one, number 1 is how large did Triceratops really grow to? What was its maximum potential body size? There's a lot of estimates, guesstimates, speculations thrown out there around 9 meters, 10 meters long. Tonnage varies, but and of course whales, dinosaurs, we have to talk in tonnage a lot of the time, most of the time. But with Triceratops, how large was it? Actually, there are some huge skulls that have been found, so exceeding the linear dimensions, so total length of the skull, length of the what we call the basal skull length, the BSL, for those that want to know, which is the length from the ball joint at the back of the skull right through the tip of the upper beak. So some of those are larger than the skull of Horridus on display here at Melbourne Museum. So these are big animals. That's a big animal. It suggests a larger animal. We don't really know. So that's one. Number 2 is Triceratops has a, frankly, ferocious food acquisition and processing device. So its beak, its jaws, its battery of ever-replacing, ever-growing, if you like, teeth, well, ever-replacing, but we don't really have a good idea on what it was eating. We assume it was vegetation, it was plants, probably, but would Triceratops have been above having a bit of a nibble of a turning the tables T.Rex carcass for a bit of extra protein and essential vitamins and minerals? Who knows? So yeah, the specific diet, or at least even general diet, even narrowing down what kinds of plants would be really nice to know. So that's Triceratops. You can do T.Rex if you want.
Well, I will add one for Triceratops, which is I would like to know and Triceratops and all of its relatives have some similarities, and one of them is they have enormous noses, and they're filled with space, and I would love to know what that is for. It's unusual and unknown elsewhere in dinosaurs. So whatever they're doing, it's a unique thing that horned dinosaurs do, and it's been beyond our understanding at the moment. I think for T-Rex, I would probably... It's a good question, since we know already too much about T-Rex. I guess, I would ask questions about T-Rex that are just questions that we have about dinosaurs in general, like things like, what is the metabolism of this animal? Is it really sort of warm-blooded? All the kind of real biology of the animal that is not in the bones, right? And which is obviously very important to knowing what the animal was like, as a living thing. And we're getting a little bit closer to some of these as time goes on, but for the most part, as beautiful as paleo art is, it is filling in stuff that we're still very far from understanding.
Now, to get to the nub of what some of the people I think in the audience might like to know is really what is happening with this encounter between these two animals.
Bull bones. I believe the hip bones are in the collections of the Museum of the Rockies in Montana. And those hip bones actually show evidence of having been really bitten and smashed, if you like, by the jaws of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So it's direct evidence of, at least on one occasion, and I'm using my words very carefully here, on one occasion, one Tyrannosaurus Rex, probably, one individual, biting the hip bone of a Triceratops. Note, I did not say hunting down, dispatching, getting into a big fight, 3 horns against the, human-sized skull or head and teeth. But that's what we do have evidence of. So there is evidence, let's say, of direct interaction between a T-Rex and a Triceratops. Was it the case that these two were eternally locked in, combat, dueling in every single clearing of the Hell Creek Formation ecosystem, latest Cretaceous landscape of Western North America? Well, maybe, but maybe not. What is probably the case, though, is that and you can just, if you look at the skeleton of Horridus, you can probably appreciate this. A full-grown, even if it's a gentle herbivore, right? A full-grown adult Triceratops in good health is going to be a dangerous proposition for even an adult Tyrannosaurus Rex. All you have to think about as analogues in today's ecosystems is when even a pride of African lions go up against a healthy adult male or female African buffalo. They are dangerous animals, all right? So even to the king or queen of beasts, an African buffalo is a fearsome opponent. So, is T-Rex just always killing every single Triceratops it sees? Probably not. Sometimes maybe. Matt, what do you think?
I would agree with that, and I think one thing to keep in mind is, for every adult Triceratops, there are more Triceratops that are younger and smaller. And there are sick ones and there are old ones and things like that. And predators figure that out, and it's a very important thing for them to figure out. Another thing I would say is big animals, once you're a big enough animal, a lot of your behavior is about risk management. Because big animals don't do certain things very well. They don't fall very well. And so, for example, if a T-Rex would break its leg, that's a pretty dangerous proposition for a 7-ton animal that only has 2 legs to walk on. But that's true in the modern world as well. And so a lot of big animals have a sort of restricted repertoire of behaviors that they are good at doing. And they don't really go out and do kind of crazy things. And that also factors into stuff like this. So, if you try to take down an elephant in your pride of lions and a bunch of lions get stepped on, that's it for those lions, really.
So what you're saying is it's potentially reality that they were sticking to prey, or at least animals, even if they were already dead. That's maybe more the size of a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. For example, one indisposed, vulnerable. And I think these things would happen at lower frequencies, right? I think this is a desperation encounter for a T-Rex, like in the movie.
Lachlan asks, what are your thoughts and opinions on last week's paper discussing T-Rex possibly being larger than the current specimens? I must say I was really impressed with Victoria, the T-Rex. It's absolutely huge. If you haven't seen it, go and see it. It's really amazing. I guess because I'm used to seeing Tarbosaurus on the floor here at in our dinosaur walk. So I can't even.
It's a big animal.
I can't
That's
even.
a big animal.
Yeah, that's a big animal, but I can't even imagine something being bigger than Victoria.
I think so. I think some of that is the desire to keep finding bigger ones, and so there's also this. Who's the biggest theropod dinosaur? Is it Spinosaurus? Is it Tyrannosaurus? Giganotosaurus, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot of pick your measurement, what do you mean by bigger? And I would say that doesn't, as a scientist, seem very interesting to me. What seems interesting to me is how similar they all are. They're all extremely close in size. These are animals that are sort of 5, 6, 7 tons. And they're not close relatives of each other. So they have each evolved this size independently from smaller ancestors. And they seem to hit a wall at about that size. And that to me is quite interesting because there must be something. Maybe if you only have 2 legs to walk on, there's only so big you can get, or maybe the pressures of being a predator on population size. There's something at work there that I think is an interesting question.
So it's more about the limits to growing bigger and what they might be. Erich, would you like to think about the size of things based on your work on whales? Obviously, they are in a different environment.
Whales are cheaters, I have to say.
They figured it out. They
tomato.
They figured it out. All right, they figured it out. I guess I often think about the opposite end of the spectrum, right? When it comes to body size and dinosaurs, and you might think of it as dinosaurs, and we'll focus at the moment on T-Rex and its kin. So that's the theropod, the carnivorous, well, at least ancestrally carnivorous dinosaurs, because some relatives of T-Rex, including things like, I think, the ostrich mimic dinosaurs, ornithomimosaurs, they probably secondarily, so they evolved from a carnivorous ancestor, but probably evolved more herbivorous habits, let's say, later in their history. But let's for now just think of them as carnivorous dinosaurs, the theropods, including, of course, birds. So if we think about them, the theropod size range is something like the largest T-Rex, Spinosaurus, Giganotosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, right? But then at the other end of the spectrum, and now we're going to remove the birds. So birds, they cheat. I'll say birds cheat.
Agreed.
Okay, they are cheaters because they fly. Any of these animals that do extreme things, cheaters. So, or trespassers, you might say. So once you remove the birds, the non-bird carnivorous dinosaurs, theropods, some of them are little, but they're not as little as birds. The avian theropod dinosaurs, or some birds, and they're also not as little as, some lizards, mammals. So I often wonder about there being a non-bird theropod dinosaur size range, and never shall they be smaller than that, and never shall they be larger. So there perhaps are some physical environmental constraints, some energetic, so physiological, thermophysiological perhaps constraints on the size of these theropod dinosaurs that we don't maybe yet fully understand.
We've got some interest here in more about anatomy, and I know that that's both of your special subject.
Oh, yes.
What's with the small arms?
Yes. I mean, nobody knows, right? We're no closer to understanding that than we were when this thing was found in 1905.
Just speculate.
Here's what I'll say. Body parts are expensive to build and maintain. So when they are useless, they disappear quite quickly, generally speaking, in evolutionary time. Tyrannosaurs spend 50 million years getting smaller and smaller arms, and other predatory dinosaurs do this as well, and they never get rid of them. So there's flightless birds where the arms are almost gone. They're just like a little stick. Never happens to predatory dinosaurs. They always have all of the bones. They always have all their fingers. They always have all the joints. They seem to have all the muscles, but they get smaller. And so my suspicion is that the original function of these arms is involved in being a predator, that they are used for grasping and manipulating prey, and that as these animals get big, the head basically does all that work. And that function is lost, but that there must be other functions for the arm in addition that they still need them for. But we don't know what any of those functions are, and so they still keep something. That's what I've got for you.
We've got some interest here in the body coverings of these animals, both what we might know about them, whether they had feathers. There's also a question from Nicholas about what's the current consensus for integument on Triceratops. I've heard proposals that it may have had quills.
Yeah, so for Triceratops, we have a pretty good idea of both the shape and the size of the scales. We'll call them scales on the body, and also the variation in the anatomy of those scales. So in the case of Triceratops, we do have some patches of fossilized or impressions of skin, or really you might think of it as natural casts or copies of the scales, or tubercles as some people call them, in the sediment around the skeleton. Some of those scales that have been found in the region of the underside of the neck and chest region have a rhomboidal outline, so they're sort of more or less triangular, relatively small. And then on the upper body, particularly over the hips and around the back region, really what you've got are almost really hexagonal scales, many of which are about the size of my outstretched palm of my hand. But then within those fields, if you like, of those tubercles, there'll be much larger tubercles which have something that almost looks like a rose thorn. They're almost like a rose thorn in structure, and it has been proposed, I'm not sure in any peer-reviewed literature, and I might add that some fantastic impressions or remains of the skin and scales of Triceratops have been found, but are still, I think, largely unstudied and certainly unpublished. So that's not out there formally in the literature yet. However, it has been proposed that at the tip of that sort of thorn or burr, if you like, in that larger scale or tubercle, that has been interpreted as bearing something like a quill, almost like what a porcupine has. There's no real direct evidence of that, so maybe they did, maybe they didn't, we don't know, but we do have a good idea of the variation and distribution of those different types of scales on the body of Triceratops. T.Rex, I think there's also some skin impressions.
There are skin impressions, again, patchy, and of close relatives, things like Albertosaurus or Daspletosaurus. And those don't show any evidence of covering. But as you go into older relatives of T.Rex, there are very clearly the very earliest tyrannosaurs that we have in the Jurassic have kind of a filament type feather on their bodies, and they're small animals. And then you have a somewhat larger animal called Yutyrannus from China, which also has a body covering like that, and it's, as far as I know, it's still the largest feathered dinosaur. But then when you get to these later forms, what little information we have doesn't show evidence of that. And they are places where some other animals do show evidence, so it's probably not preservation. I think of them the way I think of whales, right? Like whales are hairy, but not very. And probably big dinosaurs may have had stuff on them, but probably not a lot, would be my guess. It's not much of a benefit. The bigger you get, the less you need it.
Now, just to go to some things that perhaps are a bit different from the image that people have in their minds of these dinosaurs, were they good parents? Do we know?
We know some things about some. We know some dinosaurs would brood on their nests, and we have the unhappy occurrence of a dead dinosaur on a bunch of eggs. Several times, actually, we have found these fossils in Mongolia and other places. That only works up to a certain size, and then that's a disadvantageous behavior. And so you get into trying to kind of infer what dinosaurs are likely to have done, and we would sort of bracket our inference with the living relatives that we have, which are crocodilians and birds. And all of these animals exhibit at least some amount of care. Now, that could be guarding the nest, it could be guarding the young, it could be hanging out with the young at a certain amount of time. It's not human-level parental care, but it's a lot more than some animals get, and probably dinosaurs pretty broadly had that as their kind of basic level of parental care. When you get into the more bird-like dinosaurs, maybe there's the possibility that you have a more kind of, I hate to use the word sort of sophisticated, but more kind of long-lasting association between young and adults. We don't have much to go on. There's some places where you see footprints that might be a group of dinosaurs of adult-looking and little ones. We have a pile of dead Psittacosaurus babies, suggesting they hung out together. So there's clues that there's some degree of sociality that is involved in kind of the young's lives.
So probably it was really a grade, if you like.
Yeah, I'm sure, like with birds, there's a whole sort of smear of behaviors. But I think what you're not dealing with is like something like a fish, where you just sort of lay the eggs and leave. That's probably a lot more than that going on.
Now, this conversation is about the rise and fall of T.Rex and Tyrannosaurus Rex and Triceratops. What would you say was the fall?
They were just on their way out because the mammals had come along, you see, and that was curtains for them. Pea-brained reptiles and all that.
This is what I grew up with.
He's pulling your leg. He's pulling your leg.
The mammals ate their eggs.
The mammals ate their eggs. I guess really there's, and I know there's probably the combination of two there. There's two major ideas, and that is that there was it was an absolute, relatively rapid on geologic timescales cataclysm right at the end of the Cretaceous period, almost bang on 66 million years ago. And before that, dinosaurs were doing just fine. Everything was hunky-dory. Or they were struggling a bit. Their biodiversity, if you like, had declined from, say, 70 million years ago or even earlier, and they were on their way out, quote unquote. Where do things stand now, do you think, with the weight of evidence?
Well, I think just to follow on that, I would say the out is still the same out, which is the asteroid in both scenarios is the last word.
Yeah.
And so, and these are both dinosaurs that were there for that. Yeah. Like very much so.
So they could have witnessed.
Yes, you see always this thing where they look up and they sort of
streaking across.
Yes, most dinosaurs precede T-Rex and Triceratops, and so they were already gone. But these were truly some of the last dinosaurs. That's another live argument, and I think it's very hard to know how many dinosaurs are alive at any point in time on Earth because, for example, at this moment in time, we have a terrific record in Western North America. The Hell Creek is a great unit of rock because it is just full of fossils. If you come here to Australia, there are no rocks that record life on land at that moment, zero. I guarantee you there were lots of dinosaurs here. We just don't have them.
Who might have, amongst the dinosaurs, who conceivably might have been here? You know, in Victoria.
I mean, categorically, I would say you have probably, you're going to have sauropod dinosaurs. You're going to have big predatory dinosaurs, maybe still these megaraptorans. All these little ornithopods, you still have big ornithopods running around. Ankylosaurs are going to be here. You had a lot of predatory dinosaurs that were already here when Australia separated from Antarctica, so they're still going to be around. And likewise New Zealand. And so there's going to be, you know, many dozens of kinds of dinosaurs here. And most of the major categories, there's some open questions about whether all the kinds of dinosaurs were here, right? But, you know, you go to North America and lots of things that were here wouldn't have been in North America at the time. And so, but I think there's some reason to be suspicious of claims that dinosaurs were having a hard time. I think they weren't probably having any harder time than they might have had at other points in their history, right? I mean, the Earth does whatever it's going to do, and sometimes that's great for everybody, and sometimes it's not great for everybody. And so dinosaur diversity probably kind of did this over the 140 million years that it was around, and maybe the asteroid hit at that point and made it worse. But if the asteroid hadn't hit, they probably would have just kept doing this. So I think without the asteroid, you probably don't get the extinction.
And you probably don't get us.
And you probably don't get us. That's a fair thing to say.
And mammals on land never really got as big as the dinosaurs ever did. So we may have developed a whole range of other amazing abilities and our own, you know, interesting world of diversity amongst mammals. But
we would be a giant mammal in the Mesozoic.
Right.
If you time traveled to this environment, you would be the biggest mammal by far, by
they're all
one
like
or two orders of magnitude.
Little things like shrews running around.
You know, maybe Tasmanian devil-sized.
Yep.
You know, maybe actually wombat-sized in Madagascar,
Yep.
right from the end of the Cretaceous.
Yep.
Sort
That's
of
about it.
Wombat-sized.
That's like the king of mammals in the Mesozoic.
Yeah.
Even the giant, you know, elephants, African elephants, all the, you know, the big prehistoric elephants never got as big as these guys. Why was that?
Well, yeah. So a really good question. So first of all, I mean, mammals, I think, almost certainly have quite a different thermophysiology. So heat control, heat balance system, energetics compared to dinosaurs. I think it's pretty clear that all dinosaurs, but the largest dinosaurs are not directly comparable with, say, an adult African elephant in terms of the way its body works, putting it very, very broadly. So I think they're different animals in that regard. There must, I think, this is, and you know, maybe I don't know, Matt, whether you agree with this. To me, it seems that maybe there's other, let's say, fundamental differences between the way ecosystems work for most of the last, say, 66 million years compared to the majority of the Mesozoic era when dinosaurs are around, or at least compared to, say, the Jurassic. I don't know whether it's a function of the largest herbivores mostly feeding on non-flowering plants, how that changes their nutrition, etc., how big they need to be to get enough food to sustain that bulk, versus then the later Cretaceous when flowering plants come in. But I think dinosaurs are fundamentally not mammals. And once you remove those cheetahs, those scoundrels, the birds, the non-bird dinosaurs are they're weird. They're just weird animals.
Would you like to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that question, you know, when I was growing up, that question was always, why are dinosaurs so big? But I would ask, you know, why are mammals so small? And one of the limits, I think, on mammals is that most mammals, I'm aware I'm in Australia, is that most mammals have a live birth. And when you have live birth, it prolongs the amount of time it takes to make the next generation. And when you're big, it's a serious impact. An elephant is pregnant for 22 months. So if anything happens where your population is suffering, whether that's climate or disease or what have you, rebuilding your population is quite difficult. A dinosaur lays eggs. Even the most giant dinosaur lays eggs no bigger than a football. And so a dinosaur can lay 40 eggs, and if that nest doesn't survive, it can lay 40 more eggs. And so there's no cap. It doesn't get worse for a big dinosaur. And I think for a mammal, it can be quite catastrophic.
It's no accident, let's say, or no aberration in the data. When we look at the fossil record of mammals, it's pretty clear that those with the, let's say, maximal body size for their representative group tend to be more vulnerable to extinction.
Yeah.
And, you know, we lose most of the big mammals on land in the Pleistocene epoch, the so-called Ice Age, that we've just sort of come out of, or at least we're in a warm period now, getting warmer. So those have all gone extinct, and it's also no accident that it's those, often amongst mammals, it's those largest of the species that are very much so most vulnerable to extinction. Of course, now we have the anthropogenic effects, which is another layer on top of that, a veneer on top of their background, if you like, natural vulnerability to extinction. But yeah, if you're a mammal and you're large, it's tough. It's tough at the top, let's say.
Now, unfortunately, we're almost out of time, so I'd like to just thank everybody for coming along tonight. There'll be a few minutes at the end if you want to come up and ask. There were some great questions here that we just didn't get to, but I wanted to thank everyone who's helped tonight. Thanks up the back. Let's have a round of applause for them. And thanks to our two great speakers, Dr. Erich Fitzgerald and Dr. Matt Corano. Thank you very much. And just a final word, is there any final bit of advice you'd like to give members of our audience to think, or just a thing to think about as they walk out the door? Matt?
I would say it's great that you guys have Triceratops and T.Rex here, but go into your Victoria Falls exhibit, because that's where all of the unique dinosaurs of Australia really are.
So that's the exhibition 600 Million Years Victoria Evolves, which is one of our long-term exhibitions, and that's what's unique to this part of the world that you can't find anywhere else.
The one last thing I'd say, especially, well, not only the younger members of the audience, whether they're here in person or online, is that we have not discovered everything. In fact, you could argue we are now in a golden age of discovery in paleontology, especially here in Australia. There is a corner, there is something there for you to discover. So especially if you're a younger audience member and you're interested in paleontology, don't give up, keep being interested, because you might make a discovery that changes our understanding of the history of life on Earth.
Thank you. A great note to end on.